Fox News Alert. President Trump says a deal with Iran is now complete. Moments ago, he announced on Truth Social that the Strait of Hormuz will open without a toll and that the authorized removal of the U.S. naval blockade will go in effect. Let's bring back Trey Yingst live from Tel Aviv with more details. Trey.
Yeah, Joey, a major announcement by President Trump after more than 100 days of a state of war between the United States and Iran. A deal has been reached. President Trump, I hereby fully authorize the toll-free opening of the Strait of Hormuz and simultaneously, herewith, authorize the immediate removal of the United States naval blockade. Ships of the world, start your engines, let the oil flow. President Donald J. Trump. The president making this announcement on his birthday from the White House in Washington. There was another statement released by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, one of the key mediators in the conversations that led to this agreement to end the conflict between the United States and Iran. The Pakistani Prime Minister made a lengthy announcement thanking both the United States and Qatar for their role in reaching this agreement. The Prime Minister says there will be an official signing ceremony on Friday, June 19th. In Switzerland. So again, a major development here as President Trump announces there is a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is open once again. Those vessels that are trapped in the Persian Gulf will be able to export that crude oil from these Gulf countries. The naval blockade lifted on Iranian ports, and these detailed discussions on Iran's nuclear program set to begin. A major development in the Middle East, and for the first time in months, the region is breathing a sigh of relief.
Which means that he has assurances from Iran they're not going to try and put that toll on ships. I know that a senior administration official did a briefing a couple of days ago and said, hey, it'll be kind of a slow walk because certain companies, certain countries aren't as sure as others that strait is not mined, and we're still kind of building confidence. So what do you think the first steps of third parties will be, those ships and other countries, things of that nature?
Well, I think that the president getting this across the finish line tonight was very significant because, remember, Israel was bracing for the possibility of incoming Iranian ballistic missiles just hours ago.
Yeah.
And the president clearly got on the phone and told them, hold your fire, sign the deal. And that's what's happened here. And again, this announcement by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, along with the announcement by President Trump on Truth Social. The fact that there is an immediate opening of the Strait of Hormuz is significant because this is 50% of what the president was trying to get. The other 50% has to do with Iran's nuclear program, and these detailed discussions will take place in the days and weeks ahead. When we think back to when Operation Epic Fury began, there was one goal that President Trump had, and he told us this goal over and over again when we would speak with the president. He said Iran cannot have a path to a nuclear weapon. And during Operation Epic Fury, not only was the Iranian military degraded, but you also had this naval blockade of Iranian ports that was crippling the Iranian economy. It put the Iranian regime up against a wall in a position where ultimately they had to facilities, Fordow and Isfahan, and buried that highly enriched uranium deep underground. And we have to consider that moment when we look at the significance of what was just announced by President Trump, because this is an agreement between the United States and Iran, but it comes after the United States destroyed Iranian nuclear facilities, decimated the Iranian Navy, took out many of the production lines for Iranian ballistic missiles and drones, and has now set a new path for the region. And that is the hope of President Trump, that this is going to lead to these broader normalization deals across the Middle East. And he urged Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others to normalize ties with Israel in the aftermath of Operation Epic Fury. Because, again, the vision here for the president is a Middle East where there isn't a constant state of war, but rather opportunity and prosperity for countries across the region. And so it's a significant announcement. Certainly there is still a lot of work to be done. There's a big difference between signing and implementing a deal. But this is a major first step toward peace in the region, and the president has gotten this deal across the finish line that will now immediately open the Strait of Hormuz, free those vessels that are currently trapped in the Persian Gulf, and now enter into these detailed negotiations on Iran's nuclear program. Guys?
So, Trey, I want to dig into that a little bit. Obviously, you know, as far as we're concerned politically and economically, that strait being open for free passage is a major deal, and it's certainly nothing to scoff at in the immediate. It's great news. I would say, in terms of what's to come next, does this mean when we say we have a deal, does this mean that Iran effectively said, all right, we're not going to pursue a nuclear program, or does it mean we have a deal to have more talks on your nuclear program and what we're going to do with the remnants of it? Just to clarify that, because, you know, sometimes it gets a little sticky exactly what the Iranians have agreed to.
As part of this memorandum of understanding, the Iranians will agree to not pursue a nuclear weapon, but they'll also agree to this process that will ultimately lead to the highly enriched uranium that is currently buried deep underground in the aftermath of Operation Midnight Hammer to be diluted and destroyed. And remember, that highly enriched uranium is what is needed to create a nuclear weapon. It's what the Iranians said they had enough of to create 11 nuclear bombs. And it's one of the main reasons that President Trump ordered Operation Epic Fury. When we think back, though, to what this agreement means moving forward, we have to look also at the sanctions relief for the Iranian regime. The Iranians will receive some sanctions relief. But according to this senior administration official, this is contingent on the Iranians upholding their end of the bargain. And so they're not going to get any sort of relief unless they are moving forward with keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and ensuring that this nuclear material is ultimately exported or destroyed inside of their country. And so, again, this is a new chapter in the region, and it's not going to necessarily go perfectly smoothly. But the fact that this announcement, especially from the Prime Minister of Pakistan, includes a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon, which means Hezbollah, it's a new opportunity for the region, and it's an opportunity for the region to look forward and past this round of conflict. And there will be a lot of statements made by the Iranian regime in the days ahead. It will not be uncommon to see officials in Tehran focus on one specific part of the agreement that looks good for the Iranians. Sure. But that is what they do, and it's often how they use state media. It's important to look at the deal as a whole and what it means. And it means that the Strait of Hormuz is immediately open. The U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports is lifted, and ultimately you are not going to in chief. He is looking for a situation in the Middle East that leads to more peace and prosperity. You have the normalization deals and the efforts toward a deal between Israel and Lebanon to ultimately disarm Hezbollah. You have the Abraham Accords that normalize ties between the UAE and Israel and Bahrain and Israel and others. And those are really the best example from the first Trump administration of the opportunity that exists in the region. When we first started reporting here in the Middle East, when I arrived here 8 years ago, you couldn't fly on a plane from Tel Aviv to Dubai. And now it's one of the most popular destinations for Israelis and Emiratis. And so you have this situation where there is opportunity in the aftermath. And so, again, the implementation of a deal is very different than signing a deal, but this is the first step toward opening the Strait of Hormuz and ultimately entering into those more detailed discussions on Iran's nuclear program.
Trey, on that point, this news, this announcement obviously is very significant. And we're treating it as major breaking news because it is. And I think a lot of viewers at home might be wondering, okay, good, there's a deal. They've got this signing ceremony apparently on deck for next Friday, this coming Friday in Switzerland. That's all wonderful, but is it a good deal? Assessing that is going to depend on the details of what is on the paper that they're all going to sign. When are we going to get a real sense of what's actually in the document in a concrete sense? Because we've heard assurances from administration officials saying it'll be X, Y, and Z, which sound promising to me. Then you hear the spin from the Iranian regime, which gets then disputed or swatted down. When will the world get a sense of what's actually in this deal? Do you have any sense on the timeline there?
The short answer is we don't know. Relief for the Iranians, they will have to adhere to their end of the bargain before they see any sort of relief for their country. But remember, it wasn't just the United States that had a say in what was taking place. It was also these Gulf countries like Qatar and Pakistan. Pakistan, obviously not a Gulf country, but certainly a mediator in all of this. But there were countries involved, and they had a say in how this would unfold, understanding that Iran is notoriously difficult to deal with at the negotiating table. And this was a challenge for the Trump administration because this is a country that ultimately kept stepping back from the table. And every time the Trump administration offered an olive branch to Iran, they wouldn't take it. And we saw this last week. It was a moment that I would say was a turning point that actually led to this agreement taking place. President Trump was sitting in the Situation Room, and he was joined by Vice President Vance and his special envoys, Witkoff and Kushner. And they were at the table, and I was speaking with the president on the phone, and another phone rang inside the Situation Room, and it was the Iranians. And ultimately, the president left our call, answered their call, and they were asking him to stop the bombing. And ultimately, he did. And he said, you have to sign the agreement, and I'll stop the bombing. But this moment set things advance. It advanced the conversation to a place that actually allowed this agreement to get signed. Because, again, the Iranians, according to President Trump, were tapping the United States along. And ultimately, the United States, after the Apache helicopter was taken down by an Iranian drone, responded with heavy airstrikes that also included 49 Tomahawk missiles launched toward targets as close as 40 miles from the capital of Tehran. And this sent a very clear message to the Iranian regime. If you don't want to resolve this at the negotiating table, it will be resolved on the battlefield. The leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, was killed, along with 40 other senior officials. The second tier of officials in Iran taken out. And again, it raised this question for the regime, is it worth it? And ultimately, they decided to take this diplomatic path. And according to President Trump and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, they have signed a deal.
Trey, former President Obama was on TV earlier today saying, you know, whatever deal the president is able to sign, that it wouldn't be much different than his deal, the JCPOA. Can you tell us how this deal is different and how it is better?
So broadly speaking, the JCPOA deal negotiated under President Obama allowed Iran a path toward a nuclear program. Because when we talk about enriched uranium, and this is really important when we look at the difference in these deals here, and I don't want to give you too much of a lesson on enrichment, but it's actually quite important when we're talking about the Obama deal versus the deal that was just signed right now. During the Obama administration, it allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium. And the way that uranium is enriched, the uranium ore is actually extracted from the ground, and then through a chemical process, it turns into yellow cake. And then another chemical process, it turns into hexafluoride gas. And they spin that gas very rapidly in advanced centrifuges. And ultimately, the heavier particles go to the outside and the lighter ones stay in the middle. And this is repeated over and over again until you get to a higher purity of enriched uranium. And to take enriched uranium from, let's say, 5 to 10% to 20%, ultimately to 60%, and eventually 90%, which is weapons-grade material, can be a matter of weeks, if not days. And so allowing the Iranians to keep advanced centrifuges and then enrich uranium eventually closer to weapons-grade material, and that means they're not going to be able to repeat that process in advanced centrifuges, and then once U.S. forces leave the region, increase the purity of the enriched uranium again toward a nuclear weapon. And so it's quite different in that regard. The sanctions relief is also different because the sanctions relief is contingent on the Iranians adhering to their end of the bargain.
You know, so, we hear about things like sanctions. For example, the amount of sanctions that have gone on Russia, the amount of sanctions that have been on Iran for a really long time, or sanctions on North Korea. And here we sit believing they probably have a nuclear program, if not a functional weapon at this point. And the reason why I bring that up is this seems like such a different scenario in the world than when the JCPOA was signed. For example, there have been since February, well, there are months worth of direct attacks in Iran. If we go all the way back to Midnight Hammer, that was June 21st of 2025. For a year, we have attacked at will inside the borders of Iran when necessary or when President Trump felt like it was the right thing to do. Then you have the Abraham Accords. You have in February, just right after the initiation of Epic Fury, Iran attacks their Middle Eastern allies or their Middle Eastern neighbors. All of those things create a completely different scenario than the JCPOA. And I'd love for you to elaborate on that because I think that's the part of this that may not be written on a piece of paper, but can create a completely different situation with this deal that may get ironed out than anything we've ever had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about these Gulf countries like Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, these are countries that the Iranians, during Operation Epic Fury, came out and said that they were friendly with, and then bombed their civilian population with medium-range ballistic missiles and drones. And so when we look at that in the Trump administration, and some of that has to do with the trust that was built, actually all the way back to the agreement that was reached between Israel and Hamas inside Gaza to free the hostages and end the war there. And it's all connected because there was a moment where you had President Trump and you had his envoys in the region, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, go to Egypt. And it's a very interesting but long story, but the short story is that the president actually got on the phone to get the agreement across the finish line. And when this was taking place, you had his envoys in the region building trust between these Gulf countries because they understood that the next hurdle to peace was ultimately the
Fox News provides 24-hour news coverage featuring a mix of breaking news, political analysis, and opinion-based programming. Popular shows often include Fox and Friends, The Five, Hannity, Gutfeld, and Special Report with Bret Baier. Availability: you can access Fox News through various platforms, including traditional cable, their official website, the Fox News mobile app, and their Fox One streaming service. Political stance: the network is widely recognized for its conservative editorial perspective. It has frequently been the subject of academic and media analysis regarding its political influence, coverage of the Republican Party, and its role in the American media landscape. Content: in addition to political commentary, the network covers business, sports, weather, health, and general news. It also operates specialized services like Fox Nation, which offers original documentaries, specials, and entertainment content. The network maintains a significant digital presence, including a robust YouTube channel and dedicated apps that allow users to watch live broadcasts, on-demand clips, and podcasts. This YouTube channel is relevant as it provides direct access to the latest video clips, news segments, and daily updates from the network's various programs.